There are a lot of misunderstood characters in A Song of Ice and Fire, but I think that Rhaego Targaryen might be the most misunderstood. To be fair, it's because there's a lot of magic and mystery around Rhaego's birth. But one thing that I feel very confident in determining based on what we get in Dany's 9th and 10th POV chapters in A Game of Thrones is, while Rhaego absolutely had to die in order for Daenerys to become the mother of dragons, Azor Ahai, the prince that was promised, in order for her to find herself in a situation where she would walk into that pyre and sacrifice herself that way, Rhaego had to die. So in an indirect way, Rhaego's death contributed to the birth of the dragons. But Rhaego's life was not one of the only death can pay for lives in the pyre scene and the birth of the dragons. And that is because Rhaego was sacrificed for Drogo. This is an excerpt from Daenerys' 9th POV in A Game of Thrones. She says to Miri, "You warned me that only death could pay for life. I thought you meant the horse." "No," Miri Masdor said. "That was a lie you told yourself. You knew the price." Had she? If I look back, I am lost. So what's happening in this conversation? One, Miri is very directly telling us Rhaego was always going to be the sacrifice for Drogo. And Dany saying, if I look back, I am lost. Her refusal here to genuinely reflect on whether or not she knew in her heart of hearts is confirmation that she knew in her heart of hearts. And she's saying, it doesn't matter. There's nothing I can do about it. If I look back, I am lost. Then Dany says, the horse, my child, Quoro and Kotho, Hago and Koholo, the price was paid and paid and paid. She rose from her cushions. Where is Khal Drogo? Show him to me, God's wife, blood mage, whatever you are. Show me Khal Drogo. Show me what I bought with my son's life. Now, a lot of people still don't believe it, and they agree with Dany, and they say, well, what about the horse? The horse was for show. The horse was misleading on purpose. That was part of the game. That was part of what Miri was playing at. Because when Dany asks her, what do you mean to do with the horse? We need the blood, Miri answered. That is the way. She needs the blood, not the life. Then Dany goes on to liken this to the heart that she ate in Vaes Dothrak. I am Khaleesi, I say it is not forbidden. In Vaes Dothrak, Khal Drogo slew a stallion, and I ate his heart to give our son strength and courage. This is the same. Then Miri says, as the horse and its blood goes into the bath, strength of the mount go into the rider, Miri sang as horse blood swirled into the waters of Drogo's bath. Strength of the beast go into the man. And she says this after what Dany just said about comparing it to eating the heart for strength. This is because when they put Khal Drogo in the bath, Khal Drogo writhed feebly as Ricaro and Quoro lowered him into the bath. No, he muttered, no, must ride. Once in the water, all the strength seemed to leak out of him. So the blood of the horse is meant to give Khal Drogo strength, but it is not going to give him life. But Miri wants this to intentionally be misleading because she's coaxing Dany into a false sense of security. Dany knows in her heart of hearts this is the price she's going to have to pay, but seeing the horse putting on this show for Dany lures her into a false sense of security, which is part of the cruelty that Miri is wanting to partake in here. Now, I also want to point out that Rhaego can't be part of the ritual to bring forth the dragons because his death occurs before Dany begins her ritual. So it's like, it's a death, yes, it is a necessary death in order for her to get to where she needs to get in her journey, but that does not make it a direct sacrifice. This, what I'm about to read, is when the ritual for the dragons starts. She's sitting with Drogo, and he's in this, like, catatonic state. It's after all the blood magic, the sacrifice of Rhaego, has gone down. The memory of her first ride was with her when she led him out into the darkness, for the Dothraki believed that all things of importance in a man's life must be done beneath an open sky. She told herself that there were powers stronger than hatred, and spells older and truer than any magi had learned in Ashai. The night was black and moonless, but overhead 1,000,000 stars burned bright. She took that for an omen. So she takes the stars for an omen that her ritual is going to work, that she's correct in what she is about to do. That's the omen. It ends with, she knelt, kissed Drogo on the lips, and pressed the cushion down across his face. This is the beginning of her ritual. This is the first sacrifice of 3 to bring forth the dragons. The sacrifices that brought forth the dragons are Drogo, resulting in Viserion, Miri, resulting in Rhaegal, and Dany herself walking into the pyre, resulting in the birth of Drogon and the forging of Lightbringer. Rhaego. A necessary death, yes, not one of the sacrifices for the dragons. And so kind of another cue in there that this is the beginning of Dany's ritual to birth the dragons is we get that story from Doria about the birth of dragons from the moon. It was a cracked egg, blah, 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 got too close to the sun. But then she says that one day the other moon will kiss the sun and the dragons will return. And so when we get the line, Daenerys knelt and kissed Drogo, this is Daenerys, moon of my life, kissing Drogo, my son and my stars. The moon will kiss the sun and dragons will return, which is exactly what happens. So that's how we know that that is the beginning of Dany's ritual. And if that is the beginning of Dany's ritual to birth the 3 dragons, his sacrifice already accounted for. So thematically, with Dany's theme of 3s, where I actually think Rhaego fits in is not in the 3 sacrifices for the dragons, but in 3 necessary deaths in order for Daenerys to become who she is destined to become. And who I mean is Viserys, Drogo, and Rhaego, because each of them would have interfered with Daenerys becoming Mother of Dragons Azor Ahai, the prince who was promised. We had already seen a prophecy that we know is about Daenerys, the stallion who mounts the world, being misattributed to her son, solely because he's a boy. As long as Drogo was alive, Dany would always be subjugated by him. She would never be able to break any wheel as long as Drogo was her ride-along, or as long as she was Drogo's ride-along. And same with Viserys. So thematically, those are the 3 deaths that absolutely had to happen in order for Dany to become who she's going to become. It's also why she's called Daughter of Death. Because in order for her to be reborn as Azor Ahai, it's in the shadow of death. Even her birth is in the shadow of death, of her father, of her brother, of her mother, another set of 3. So anyway, what I'm saying is, yes, thematically he fits the 3. He is technically a sacrifice in Dany's hero's journey, but he was not a sacrifice for the dragons. This is an excellent question. This is going to require a lot of conjecture and a lot of exploration of things that happen in other parts of the story in order to come up with an answer. And of course, this is just my answer. It's all up for interpretation. That being said, I need you to strap in because it's going to feel like I'm jumping around, but I promise it will all come together at the end. So the first thing is, Miri absolutely knew what Dany would be getting with her son's life. She knew that Drogo was not going to come back fully himself. And the reason for that is because, and we'll talk about why I believe this in a moment, the sacrifice that you put in is equivalent to what you're going to get out of the ritual. Meaning, Drogo was fucked because the sacrifice being put forth for him was an unborn infant child. Because there are 2 different things happening with Rhaego, and I think that is very confusing for people. 1, he is the sacrifice in a blood ritual, and 2, he is also one of the infamous Targaryen dragon babies. Those 2 things exist independently of each other. And how we know that is because George then gave us Targaryen history in which other Targaryen women had babies like this, that is then confirmed in House of the Dragon with baby Visenya. So this is separately a thing that happens with Targaryen women, particularly in my belief system, Targaryen women with what we will call the Dragon X gene. The Dragon X gene refers to this idea that the Targaryen magic, the reproduction of dragons, the success of dragon hatching is tied to the fertility of specific Targaryen women who have this Dragon X gene. And this Dragon X gene is a result of the fucked up blood magic that they did in Old Valyria. It's like a remnant of that. So, while Miri knew that the output of this sacrifice would be equivalent to that of an unborn infant child, she couldn't have known that it would also be the equivalent of an unborn infant dragon baby child. This excerpt is from Dany 9. This is Miri talking about Rhaego after she pulled him forth from Daenerys. Monstrous, Miri Masjor finished for him. The knight was a powerful man, yet Dany understood in that moment that the Magi was stronger and crueler and infinitely more dangerous. Twisted, I drew him forth myself. He was scaled like a lizard, blind, a stub of a tail, and small leather wings like the wings of a bat. When I touched him, the flesh sloughed off his bone, and inside he was full of grave worms and the stink of corruption. He had been dead for years. Quick aside, him being full of grave worms and her saying he had been dead for years is her way of saying, like, this child was always doomed. Like, this child was conceived to die, essentially. So when Dany wakes up and she tells Miri, take me to Drogo, show me what I bought with my son's life, she is describing him and she says his eyes were wide open but did not see, and she knew at once that he was blind. And Miri tells us earlier that Rhaego was blind. So this is like a subtle clue that this is a direct exchange. So Drogo's condition is a reflection of Rhaego's condition. Dany says, your spells are costly, Meiji. He lives, said Miri Masdrer. You asked for life, you paid for life. Dany goes on to say, you knew, Dany said when they were gone. She ached inside and out, but her fury gave her strength. You knew what I was buying, and you knew the price, and you let me pay it. It was wrong of them to burn my temple, the heavy flat-nosed woman said placidly. That angered the great shepherd. Dany says, you cheated me. You murdered my child within me. The stallion who mounts the world will burn no cities now. His Khalasar shall trample no nations into dust. LOL. LOL. Poor Miri. She did all of this to stop the stallion who mounts the world, only to create it. Who the fuck does that sound like, Melisandre? And LOL again, because what do Miri Masdrer and Melisandre have in common? They were both trained in a Shai. Okay, before I get too distracted and forget the entire premise of this video, which is, how do I know, or why do I suspect the even trade theory that you are going to get out of a sacrifice what you put into a sacrifice? And so my citation for this is the mythos of Nissa Nissa and the Forging of Lightbringer, in which we are told that during the blood sacrifice of Nissa Nissa, her courage, her strength, her essence, her soul go into the weapon, a dragon. We see that again in Dany's birthing of the dragons and the 3 sacrifices that are made to birth the dragons. Those sacrifices are evident in the dragons themselves because that same merging happened. And we're going to see something in that thematic vein with Jon and Ghost when Jon is resurrected. So with these various other aspects of the story, it kind of gives us context as to how blood magic works, how this blood sacrifice phenomenon works. And we can kind of parse out with relative certainty that there's this equal input-output thing going on. In which case, the way that Drogo ends up after the blood sacrifice of Rhaego makes perfect sense. He's a helpless infant who is also, in a lot of trouble because he's a fucking dragon infant. Does that make sense? Again, this is conjecture. This is me reading between the lines. This is me using other context clues, other parts of the story to try and make sense of the magic that is happening in those Dany chapters. And, George intentionally has left the magic pretty vague because he doesn't want there to be definitive answers. It's meant to be a little bit miraculous. But he's also George R.R. Martin, so there are going to be machinations that I think we can kind of pick apart.